Welcome everyone. I'm going to be close to my notes. It's my binky. I am Kathleen McMahon, and I'm here to talk to you about how you can flavor your React components with accessibility seasonings to make your design system delicious. So, since time is compressed, and I want to be kind to our live captioners and not speak too fast, my slide deck will be available up unnoticed after the talk. That's at https://noti.st/resource11. You can also follow me at resource11 on Twitter, Instagram, and GitHub. Now, here's an outline of what we're going to be talking about today. Oh yeah, I have an agenda. So, why accessibility first? Your design systems are a cookbook. Design systems and React. We'll talk about some patterns for icons, buttons, inputs, and a little bit of documentation. But let's back up for a second so I can introduce myself a little bit better. So, I am the tech lead for O'Reilly Media Design System, and I race bikes very badly. Mostly, you will find me, yes, there's a wow there, racing 2 laps to your 6 on a single speed at the back of the pack, wearing a costume. Because who doesn't love a clown, right? Maybe not this clown. So, moving forward, I also forgot to mention, my hair issues today. I am a dev dinosaur, and I find it fascinating to see how far we've come from the tools we had and the software that we've used and the storage materials we had and what we used for reference. While our browser choices were limited, Netscape anyone? Our stack has stood the test of time. Yes. Fast forward to today, and there seems to be a JavaScript framework released every week, and you can feel a bit overwhelmed to keep up with what's going on in this industry and to find that place where you can thrive, especially if you happen to have both a design and engineering background, and if you happen to love to use the fundamental stack. So imagine how excited I was to learn when I joined O'Reilly Media that they had a design system and they were just starting work on refactoring their component library. My inner dinosaur literally did a backflip because dinosaurs are always a hotness. But I knew now this is a place where that fundamental stack really is needed. I can't get enough of this dinosaur, especially in an industry where the div has become the reluctant king. So admittedly, I didn't know much about what went into a design system. This is my first design system role. So there's a bit of a learning curve if you look at this chart by Nate Baldwin. I look at that, I was like, wow, that's a lot. And our team is small. We had the benefit of 2 contractors joining us for the first 3 months of our reboot, but in essence, we've had a core team, kitties, of 3 to 4 people. And so we've had to be very strategic in what we choose to tackle first, which is tough with so many moving parts in a design system. So our first priority, business logic out, accessibility in. Fix our colors, our components, our patterns, and reboot our docs. But why accessibility first, do you ask? Well, our users have varied needs, and because so often it's what's handled last, and that really sends a poor message to our users. So if you have happened to read the WebAIM Million report, the results are pretty depressing. So with the amount of errors found on pages, 97.8, the amount of missing labels in inputs, and unnecessary ARIA attributes added to pages, we are making the web worse in the name of good intentions. So while we have these web content accessibility guidelines to help us, which honestly really sets a really low bar, it's like the absolute minimum bar to pass, we have been missing the mark in the industry as a whole when it comes to making our apps accessible. Imagine though, if you had accessibility baked right into your components. A design system is a perfect place for this. I like to say that your design system is a cookbook, and cookbooks have a personality. My mom is a serious fan of cooking, and lately I've really enjoyed digging through the old cookbooks she has collected over the years. And if you happen to take a look at some of the cookbooks published in the 1940s through 60s, and look past the outdated views on women, you will find some interesting recipes, some questionable food combinations, including Jell-O and meat. Yes, who doesn't want that meat mold? But there also is an impressive level of detail paid to every part of the cooking process. Look at this. Instructions on how to set a table and entertain. This is very similar to how a design system is structured. So what does that have to do with React? Well, if you look at React's documentation, there's a page on accessibility. It says React fully supports building accessible websites, often by using standard HTML and CSS techniques. I like to say React is a kitchen utensil. It's not the only utensil in the kitchen. You are the cook. It is my opinion that it is up to the developer to have that standard HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and accessibility knowledge to be able to leverage a utensil correctly, and that includes React. That said, if your developers are unsure how to get started building inclusive apps, empower them with your design system. Add some features into your components to help them along. Then you can celebrate those hard-fought accessibility wins because your team will start building inclusive apps without you having to ask for it anymore. So your components are your tried and true recipes. And WCAG is your reference material. Creating a component is like following a recipe. You start off with your high-quality ingredients. That's your semantic HTML. You mix in some seasoning, just a touch of ARIA attributes. You follow directions. That's your documentation. I did spell that correctly, yes. And you read your helpful hints. Those are the best practices. Let's take these properties and apply them to some components. So icons. Icons can be either informative or decorative. Informative icons need to be paired with descriptive text to give context to screen readers. Decorative icons don't add enough significant value to screen readers, so they need to be hidden from the screen reader flow. There is more than one way to create an accessible icon. The two most recent hot techniques are using SVGs and icon fonts. And initially, we used SVG icons in our design system, combined them all into a sprite sheet, and then we ran into some problems when we started testing. So when we were testing on VoiceOver, on Safari, and High Sierra, we would discover this bug where VoiceOver would announce every single group in that sprite sheet. 100 icons announcing group. It was noisy. It was not pretty. I cried. So we had to think fast to find another solution. So icon fonts to the rescue. It's tried and true. So we will revisit SVG icons in the future, but for now, we are gonna go with icon fonts. So I'm gonna show you a pattern that you can use to create an accessible icon using semantic HTML and the icon font technique. So this is typically what you will see as an icon font pattern in the wild, but it's not accessible. This is an accessible icon pattern, and let's break it down. So this first class contains our icon font, has a sprinkling of ARIA hidden attribute to take that icon, which is that content injected at /F12F. They want to hide that from screen readers. But with our second span here, which has our descriptive text, we add the visually hidden class that will hide the text from the UI, but keep it exposed for screen readers. We wrap both those spans with a containing span and add another class there to convert the span's native display of inline to inline block. This is important so we can customize the margin and padding on all 4 sides of the component. So notice we're using spans all the way down. This is very important for when we compose this component into other components later on. So this is an accessible icon pattern in HTML. But remember, we have 2 types of icons, informative and decorative. So do we need to modify anything? Well, informative icons should announce, so we don't modify anything in this pattern. But if it's a decorative icon, we need to hide it from screen readers, so we'll add a pinch of already hidden true to the wrapping span. We'll take it completely out of the screen reader's purview flow. So we're going to pop that syntax into a functional component, and then we're going to convert this to some JSX. We do this by converting class to class name, convert that true string to a Boolean, and close the empty span. And voila, you have JSX syntax. You just made your first React component. You can celebrate. So let's make this component more flexible, because right now it's pretty static. We are going to add in some prop support. We're going to support icon hidden, name, title, props, and we're going to add some guardrails here. It is very important to create guardrails for your components so you can make sure that your developers are always using the accessibility features that you have built in for them. For our icon component, we have added 3 guardrails. The first one is the icon naming guardrails. If the developer passes in a name into that prop, we are going to check it against any of the icons that are in our library. If that name does not exist in our library, this icon will not render and will throw an error. Second guardrail is the description guardrail. If the developer does not pass in any descriptive text for that title, we will always have a fallback of that icon name. The file name will always render into this component as a fallback. The last guardrail is the most important, the icon hidden prop. And I'm gonna walk over here so I can say all of it without stumbling. So if the developer passes an icon hidden attribute of true here, the aria hidden equals true attribute will attach to the span when it is rendered into the DOM. If no icon hidden prop is passed in, that aria hidden attribute will not attach at all in the DOM. This will guarantee that if the developer doesn't pass anything in, this icon will always announce unless the developer purposely specifies that it should not announce. Also, this true or null pattern is very important because there are certain HTML attributes that need to be either attached to an element in the DOM or not at all. Aria hidden is one of them. This is also important for supporting older screen readers because sometimes if you pass in a false value of aria hidden, for older screen readers, it might announce. So true or null, really good pattern. So moving on to buttons. Buttons perform an action on the page. They should look and act like a button. If you're using this to change a route or a URL, please use a link and make it look like a link. Everyone will be so happy when you do. Also, buttons. What comes for free with the button? Screen reader support and keyboard functionality. It's free. So let's start off with building a button component. Here's our high quality ingredient, the button element. And we're going to sprinkle a touch of aria on here to handle those edge cases when maybe you can't control the data that's coming in and you have 5 read more buttons on the page. If a screen reader user is scanning your page and they're looking at all the links at once and they hear read more 5 times, what are you reading more about? You can pass in an aria label here to read more about dinosaurs. There is a caveat here though. If your app needs to support localization, this pattern won't work very well. Adrian Roselli just published a great article with a different pattern that uses aria described by to handle situations where you need to change the button text and also support screen readers if you are localizing your text. So this is an accessible button in HTML. Actually, in React, because I see the class name there. If we want to make icon button, we just pop our icon inside the button children. And we are going to wrap the button children and icon in another span. This is important because buttons should only receive inline level elements as their children. Buttons cannot receive block level elements or buttons or links or buttons inside of buttons inside of buttons. None of that. A div is not inline. It is block level. It will render implicitly as a p tag. So this is why that icon component was made with all spans, because when you pop it in here, you are guaranteeing that you have valid HTML in your component here. We're going to add some props, and we're going to add some click handle support, and we're also, if we want to have our button to be able to have disabled properties, we're going to pass it in, use that true or null pattern here. And our one guide rail here is no icon name, no icon in that button. Inputs. Inputs need labels and error messages. Labeled inputs give users more context. And no, placeholders, I'm sorry, they are not labels. Avoid using them. Your users will lose context. They'll start typing back, trying to figure out where they are. So don't use it there. Don't rely on those. Placeholders are hard to style across browsers, and they are not auto-translated. Also, be kind to your users that rely on screen magnification. Don't make your inputs wider than 80 characters. Keep your labels and error messages in close proximity to each other, and stack the label above the input and the error message below. If you've ever seen, even on your own computer, if you've ever seen there's a picture-in-picture feature where you can start magnifying around the page, you have a credit card size area. So if you have a label up here and an error message down here, you are just, look how much time you are spending trying to figure out what this input is for. So if everything's in the same region, very close in this one small window, that screen magnification user will have a better time with using your app. So this is an accessible input component in React. A little hard to read, so let's zoom in. Okay, so we start off with semantic HTML. Those are our high quality ingredients. And inputs need labels and error messages. Notice that for attribute in the label, we changed it to HTML4 in React, and we are pairing the value in that HTML4 with the ID with the same value. This is how a label will associate with the correct input. We're going to sprinkle in a little bit of ARIA attributes here for validation. We're going to use ARIA described by to pair with the error ID, and the ARIA invalid and ARIA required attributes here. And one more sprinkling of ARIA attributes here would be the ARIA live attribute on the error text message. This is important for when error fires and the user stops typing, a message will announce at a good stopping point. We're going to add some disabled support and synthetic event supports. There's more than on-chain and on key press. There could be on focus and on blur, but I'd run out of room. We're also going to, any of our Boolean props here are going to get that true or null handling. The ARIA described by will have a little more complex expression evaluation, I forget the term, on the left to add that ID if we want it. And we're going to add our guardrails. No label, no input, and no icon. This is very important because this will help guide the developer to always use a label with an input, and very soon it will become second nature. And if they're not working in React at some point, they'll understand, oh, it's an input, it needs a label. So it just becomes that second nature knowledge to pass on to your developers. Same goes for error handling. If you don't pass in an invalid prop and the error message, you will not get that error text in there. Documentation. Those massive design systems out there provide some drool-worthy patterns. Thanks, Gina, for us to dream about. But if your team is small, showing examples of the ways your components can be used is a good first step. So our design system is still figuring out how we want to scale, but currently we are using Gatsby for our style guide, and we're using Storybook to document our components, and we deploy both instances in Sites now. And I want to touch on Storybook for just a brief moment. It's a perfect way to play with your components in isolation without mixing it up with any of the business logic. There's some really great add-ons in there. The one I can't recommend more highly is the accessibility add-on. What is great about it is it uses the Q's X-Core engine under the hood, and it tests all your components against the WCAG 2.1 success criteria, looks at all the components, and finds that low-hanging fruit errors that tells you what the error is, how to fix it, and how serious it is. And this way you can start fixing those errors, and then you'll be ready for your manual accessibility testing. Make sure you're adding helpful hints to your documentation. Wow, I'm faster than I thought. This is awesome. So make sure you give instructions on how to properly implement a component. So here is instructions on how you can implement the props for an informative icon versus a decorative icon. Make sure you're adding those props tables to your components. Give those developers a context of what the prop is for and what it does and whether it's required. And always, those component do's and don'ts are essential for your developers. Make sure you dedicate a page to accessibility resources. The WCAG page and the success criteria and the documents is just so hard to parse. If you have curated any articles on how to implement common accessibility patterns, put them in your documentation. This way, your developers will have a common source of truth to find the ways to solve these problems. Because you're not just handing them accessible components, you also have to educate how to implement it correctly, how to think through the edge cases and think through those it depends scenarios to implement that pattern correctly. So, to wrap up, our users are diverse. Your design system is a cookbook. Your cookbook has a personality. React is a kitchen utensil, and you are the cook. Components are your tried and true recipes. Woo. WCAG is your reference material, and document, document, document. And remember, dinosaurs are always the hotness. Thank you.